Welcome to Phuket in Focus, and it was the very first week of Phuket News TV, and we had our guest, Colin Mackay, with us talking about his brand new book, A History of Phuket. A great success and a seminal work for anybody who wants to know about life on the island in the past. About time we got you back, Colin. Thanks for coming in.
Cool, thank you for having me.
You're doing a talk at IBAP about women in Phuket and women in Thailand. Let's have a talk about two very famous women here in Phuket. And we drive past them most days in
Thepkasatri.
Thank you very much. You've been here longer than me.
Right.
That road. How much of the story about the two heroines is sort of mythology that's built up over the years, and how much of that story is real?
It's a real story. Of course, it's being glamorized, like all nationalities glamorize their heroes and their heroines and their stories. But yeah, there was the two sisters here, one of whom, Thao Thepkasatri or Lady Chan, the road's named after her, and the one that Thao Sison is the road that joins at the Heroines Monument. Yeah, her husband was the governor, and he died a few days before the Burmese invaded. I think 1786. So the people didn't know what to do. The normal defense of the Phuketians or any Thais was to run away. I don't mean that cowardly, but they didn't have forts very big, and so they would run away and hide.
What, smart?
Yeah, in the jungle and live off the jungle till they did whatever they did and went away. But they had surrounded the island with boats. So she convinced those who were left on the island to go into, there was an old fort, but unfortunately nobody knows where it is. I'm trying now to locate the exact spot. It may be built over by shop houses. And they held out there for just over a month. There's various glamorous stories that she got the women to dress as men, because they all had the same haircuts in those days, and got palm fronds and made them look like muskets, and marched them in the one day and out the back. But that's a bit simple. But they did hold them off, mainly because they had about 60 cannon with grape shot, and just decimated the Burmese coming up. However, the Burmese did take everything else on the island apart from this 400 by 400 square meter fort.
Yeah.
Stole everyone else they could. And although those 600 people survived the attack, many of them then subsequently died through hunger because there was no, they burned all the crops, they took all the food, and it was a very tough time for Phuket.
Well, women do hold a special place in Thai society. I mean, we've got a Thai Prime Minister, there's a Thai Mayor of
Phuket
Town.
Yeah. Senator Phuket Island is
that's
a
right.
lady.
And so what is this special thing about Thai women in the Thai society?
It originates from the fact that there were very few people here. It was an underpopulated area. I think it was King Mongkot in 1856. He said, a land without people is but a wasteland. So because they needed people all the time here, women who produce people had a very strong position. So whatever they asked for, the men tended to have to give them, or they'd go on a canoe and go off up the river and breed somewhere else. And that's how it started. The other reason was that Malay men and latterly Thai men they felt that working with money was cheap and tacky. And they were sort of lordly people who liked to live off their land. So it was the women, the wives, they'd throw into the market. So the women were always the money makers. Now, over time, making money has become a lot more important, and of course it's the women in the front. I mean, there's more women CEOs in Thailand than any other country, percentage of the population. Over 50% of the businesses in this country are owned by women, which is way above anywhere else. So even in the households, women tend to control a lot more than elsewhere. It's easy for women to divorce. So women have done a very good job at keeping themselves in power here, and the talk I'll give on Friday will go into more detail on why that is.
You mentioned King Mongkut, and there was a very famous story about a strong woman that came from England to come and teach his children.
That's right.
And that story has sort of taken its own mythology and become a bit of a Hollywood musical.
Well, that's right,
The King and I and stuff. Yet the Thais are very quick to poo-poo that story and say, no, she wasn't a strong woman.
She was a teacher in the palace for some of the he was using a lot of missionaries. He was trying to modernize the country. He got rid of the missionaries because they used to hector him too much about the practice of polygamy, and he had a lot of wives, and I think that was one reform too many for him. There's a funny story that the British ambassador who came down from Hong Kong, to, Henry Bowring, to basically force Thailand to open up, went back and wrote his memoirs of the trip and said that King Mongkot had 600 wives. And this was not true. There were 600 women in the palace, and he imagined they were all his wives. But King Mongkot was so perturbed by this salacious error that he wrote a letter to Henry Bowring in Hong Kong and said, I don't have 600 wives, it's absolutely wrong. You're completely out of order saying that. I only have 46.
That's fabulous. Why is the time right for Thailand to have a female Prime Minister?
Well, I think all around the world...
Apart from the fact that she's the sister of Thaksin Shinawatra.
You know, there we go. Let's avoid that subject. But I think all around the world, in the modernizing and the modern countries, women are now equal to men in many ways. I know some women's libbers will take that up with me as an issue, but I think it's right, given that women couldn't be governors and they couldn't be kings before, but they were often leaders in battle. There's a lot of stories, Queen Siriatai, they often led armies, they led navies. So I think it's quite fitting that we have a first woman Prime Minister here. The time's right, it's just happened, it's happening all over the world more and more. You're seeing women as Prime Ministers.
We can read more about it and the position of women in Thailand in the book, The History of Phuket. Thank you very much for coming in. I should mention that at Class Act Media here, where Phuket News TV is, let me tell you, the women run this place too.
It's like my house, right?
Colin Mackay, thanks for coming in.
Okay, thank you.
Colin Mackay on Phuket in Focus. Thanks for joining us.